Imagine with me for a moment that you are a seagull flying over the Mediterranean Sea heading east until you reach somewhere on the coast between Tel Aviv and Haifa. There you will find a charming and beautiful place known today as Dor, an ideal resort not less wonderful than the beaches of Greece, Cyprus and Sicily. Soft sand, nice atmosphere, coral reefs, greenery around and beyond the beach, a museum and some archaeological sites that date back to the Bronze Age. And many houses that, when you see them, you feel as though they came from Florida and were stationed here. Of course, there are many resorts around with various services and facilities. Since you're still a seagull who knows nothing about the place, you'll see a modern resort from the sky called Nasholim, and a few meters away from it, there's a small building of a style different from that of the surrounding place, and it doesn't really fit in with the harmony of it. A house built in an old Arab style, standing in the heart of many Western and modern style buildings. In 1991, a resident of that place decided to build a diving center next to this house. And indeed, he brought workers and equipment and started the drilling. But they suddenly stopped when they found the remains of human bones buried at a shallow depth. So they backfilled the site, left, and never came back again. This was seen by a fisherman named Fuad Hassadiyeh, who lives in a nearby Arab village called Al-Faradis. When he went to the project owner and asked him why they left, the project manager told him, "We found bones and remains from Napoleon's age." But Fuad said, "No, these are the remains of Palestinians who were killed in 1948 and were buried there." His father and grandfather told him about the massacre committed by Israeli soldiers in this place, and that the dead were buried in mass graves. One of these graves lies beneath the parking lot of that Nasholim resort. All of this happened before the resort was built, and before the place was even renamed as Dor. It happened when it was a Palestinian fishing village called the TANTOURA. TANTOURA was a small Palestinian village located at the south of Haifa on the map. Until 1948, its population was about 1,500 Palestinians who depended on fishing and farming. It was a very quiet, very small, and very, very beautiful village. After the Nakba, and for 50 years, until approximately the year 2000, nothing was said about Tantoura in Israel, other than being a village that witnessed a battle in the War of Independence between the Israelis and Arabs. And the Israelis won, and these Arabs immigrated from the village and went to the nearby village of Al-Faradis. And then the settlers established Kibbutz Nasholim there. That remained the situation until 1998, when an Israeli student at the University of Haifa published his master's thesis. This student was called Teddy Katz. While preparing his research, he sat with a number of old soldiers from a military brigade of the Israeli army called the Alexandroni Brigade. They were the ones responsible for entering Tantoura on May 10, 1948. With their testimonies, Katz discovered that the battle was not actually a real battle. That invasion wasn't a battle between two armies or two armed parties. Because despite the villagers' attempts to resist, they were poorly armed and had little experience in fighting, so the battle ended before it even started. The family's surrender after their defeat wasn't an escape from death. It was, in fact, the beginning of a massacre. On the night of May 22nd and the morning of the 23rd, Israeli soldiers invaded the village of Tantoura. At first, they separated men and women. Women were stripped of their money, gold, and anything of value. They were forcibly expelled from the village, wandering in the unknown with no place to go. As for the village's men, the soldiers forced them to gather at the shore near the Arab house I was just telling you about. Don't think this only applied to real grown-up men, but any boy who looked over the age of 13 was considered an adult man. By the Arab house, the witness of these events, the execution began. The testimonies that Teddy Katz heard from the soldiers were terrifying and were later shown combined in a movie called Tantoura by an Israeli director named Alon Schwartz. One of the soldiers said they placed individuals in barrels and shot them, and that he still remembers how the blood looked in these barrels. Someone else said, A soldier who would become a prominent figure in the defense ministry took out his pistol and started killing the hostages by the beach one after another. A third soldier named Amitsur Cohen said literally while laughing, "I was a murderer. I didn't take prisoners." How many do you think he killed? Actually, he doesn't know, and neither do we. He says while laughing, "I didn't count. I had a machine gun with 250 bullets and I finished them. I can't say how many." What I am telling you is not the testimonies of the victims, but those of the killers. These are the ones who are supposed to try and tone down the severity of their actions. So imagine it's this horrific after being toned down. The victims' testimonies are far more horrific than this. Most of the victims who escaped murder were expelled as refugees in camps, some in Syria, and some still live today in the village of Al-Faradis. This means that they went to live in a village a few kilometers away from where they lived, and their families were killed and buried. They don't even know where they're buried. It's all just guesses. Until May 2023, a research agency called Forensic Architecture published the results of an investigation conducted to answer this question. Where were these people buried? They brought airshot photographs of the TANTOURA village between the years 1946 and 1949. Pictures before and after the massacre. They did an analysis of these images and compared it with current maps of the place and recent satellite images. They did 3D modeling of the changes that occurred and also collected testimonies from people who survived the massacre. They produced a report that accurately identifies the locations of mass graves. The largest two of them, one is located next to the cemeteries of the old village, and the second one is located under the parking lot, serving a beach and resort. If you go to Google now and search for these places, the first thing you will encounter is hotel reservations and places for activities. That is all despite the fact that all of this is built literally on top of execution fields and mass graves, as if Tantoura is a metaphor for all of Israel, which is a very thin and fragile layer of Western urbanization, and only a meter below that fragile layer is evidence of killing, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. Everything I just told you now so far is from Israeli sources, not Western, but Israeli. The Arab sources contain much uglier details. But I have a reason for choosing these sources. I want to showcase some examples for the few Israeli voices that tried to dig into the roots of the Nakba and tell you what happened to them, on the hands of the only democracy in the Middle East. These people were punished exemplarily. Teddy Katz, for example, who held interviews with soldiers, had a defamation case raised against him by war criminals. His master's thesis was withdrawn from the university library, he was forced to retract everything he said, and his academic career was completely destroyed. Eyal Weissman, who founded Forensic Architecture that you saw their picture a while ago, he faced a lighter punishment. His books were banned in Israel, especially Hollow Land, because this book is considered a book of conviction, where he explains the Israeli occupation's method in building settlements in a way that strangles and expels Palestinians. These aren't individual cases. There are many examples of those who tried talking about Nakba in Israel and how they were silenced. So much so that in 2011, the Knesset approved a law known by the Nakba Law, granting the right to the Ministry of Finance to suspend government funding and official support from any institution that talks about the Nakba. Meaning in a university or a research institution, if a professor there will give a lecture about the Nakba, the government has the right to suspend its support and funding for the university. Because of this law, many books weren't published, many articles weren't issued, films weren't shot, and so on. This is all to ensure that no one messes with the made-up narrative that Israel is trying so hard to tell about itself, especially if that person is Jewish and not Zionist. This is strange to them, to the point that these anti-Zionist Jews, self-hating Jews, a humiliating name. One of the most popular self-hating Jews is Ilan Pappé, who was basically expelled from the University of Haifa, also the author of 10 Myths About Israel. These are the fictional legends Israel is feeding to the world, especially the Western imagination. The narrative that Israel tells about itself, the national narrative dictated to children in schools, can be seen in two ways. Either a bunch of lies in layers that we'd skip, or as a bunch of lies in layers that we need to understand, to know why the world believes them so bad. This myth-like narrative begins with the Jewish kingdoms on the land of Palestine that fell apart, and the Temple of Solomon was destroyed along with it. And since 70 AD, Jews were dispersed throughout the world, and for 2,000 years they were subjected to discrimination and oppression that peaked at the Holocaust. As a survival attempt, the remaining Jews decided to escape and return to the land of ancestors. That's the first part of the narrative, where Israel presents itself in the weak moment of birth, earning sympathy, making it easier for people to buy their story later on. The rest of the story can be seen in the 6th grade geography book in Israeli schools, describing the return of the brave settler Jews who bought the land and built it by using all and every means of modern technology. If I stop here, that's not enough. I need to add more details to paint the perfect picture in your mind. So we'd see the book saying that the settlers arrived and found a land of ruins and swamps, so they began digging wells to provide fresh water and using fertilizers so that the land could be farmed, developed technologies, and cleared the swamps and filled them in, so they were able to eliminate the malaria that was killing them. They also established cities like Tel Aviv, the first port in the region, adding in the detail that the sea there in Tel Aviv is shallow with little depths, so it was hard to build a port, but the settlers managed to do it anyway. If you reflect on this with me, you'd see this part is meant to entice admiration and paint a picture of the weak people who once sought a chance. They thrived, in a way that reminds us of the white settler who arrived at North America to build the United States of America. Until this part of the story, they achieved two things: sympathy and admiration. Any story needs an important element, a conflict, and the conflict needs a villain. The first villain in the Israel story, surprisingly, is the British Mandate. That's not a typical villain, but one who hinders the Jews' migrations and tries to abort their dream in building a state. Imagine a villain who's trying to stop Jews from escaping the Holocaust in Europe and resorting to the safety of their new home. So in turn you, as someone listening to the story, will hate that villain. And you're waiting for the moment when the hero will defeat the villain. The Israeli fictional narrative gives you multiple heroes, not just one. Heroes like Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Rabin, Ariel Sharon, and Shimon Peres, who joined military organizations such as Haganah, Ergun, and Lehi. If you focused, you'll see these named smartly chosen. Lehi meant fighters for the freedom of Israel. So I'm giving you a story with an organization called Freedom Fighters. Of course, you'll sympathize with me and believe the Jewish bravery and sacrifice that succeeded in forcing Britain out of the land, and you'll also be happy for me that with Britain's exit, it'd be an independence from mandate and the Jews' freedom from historical diaspora. You'll also be happy for me when the UN announces Resolution R-1 in November 1947 that partitioned Palestine into an Arab state and a Jewish state. All what I said now, my friend, you know it's a big fat lie, but what I'm trying to crystallize is that it's a well-made big lie that's highly believable. Imagine saying all this to someone who knows nothing. Then after all this, tell him that on 14th May 1948, Israel became a country with a prime minister called David Ben-Gurion. And then tell him that only one day after the state is formed, a second villain attacked that dream. It feels like an American film's plot, whereas the hero just won after defeating the first villain, and the film is almost over, a second villain shows up. Whoever's watching the film will never believe that this second villain isn't actually a villain. The second villain was the Arab. According to Israel's fictional narrative, one day after announcing their state, 7 Arab armies decided to unite and attack this newborn state to exterminate the Jews, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, KSA, Iraq, and forces from Palestine. All those are up against just one. Does the story stop there? No. The Israeli narrative continues with a story from the Israelites, the story of David and Goliath. David, the young, weak man who one day will fight the giant Goliath, the strong and mighty. And for David's faith and courage, he'll defeat Goliath. In this story, Israel is David, and the 7 Arab armies are Goliath. When I put the story in that context, who do you sympathize with? You will also believe me when I tell you a more insolent thing, when I tell you that the Palestinian Arabs left their lands to give the chance to the 7 armies to annihilate the Jews. And you'll believe me when I tell you that Israel tried its very best in all ways to convince Palestinians to return to their lands, but they refused and preferred to live as refugees. This is a story that tries to convince me that there are people who refuse returning to their lands. It's hard to believe, but they know how to tell the story well. So apparently some people do believe it. Some people even still believe to this day that Israel is doing nothing but trying to make peace with its neighbors that hate it. The story ends with stating that Israel's only dream is peace, but at the same time always ready to defend itself. As a proof of that, its army is called the Defense Army. And definitely after the Odyssey I just told you, when I say that the IDF is the most noble army, you'll believe me. This is an entirely fake story, my friend, filled with tons of lies and half-truths, but it shows Israel as the underdog, and apparently that's what made it easy to sympathize with. I know that the story is as fake as it gets, and you know it too, but apparently the average white citizen with little to no knowledge of the world around him and only lives for the iced coffee, like a Bob Buttar said, the best press reporter in the world. It appears so, that this citizen doesn't know that it's fake. Because for many decades, Israel invested in invading the Western mind with this story, in a way that assures the burial of the real story beneath. I'm here today to tell you about the real story, about the Nakba.